뉴욕주 정치인과 함께하는 타운홀 미팅이 7월 30일 금요일 오후 6시부터 베이사이드 KCS 한인봉사센터에서 열립니다. 코로나 팬데믹 이후 최악의 상황을 맞고 있는 한인 스몰 비즈니스를 살리고 소수 이민자들의 권익 신장을 위해 개최되는 이번 타운홀 미팅에 한인 동포들의 많은 참여 바랍니다.
The second topic I'd like to bring up is the Dreamers, the DACA program. So many families are living every day with so much stress and anxiety because of their immigration status. Last week, a federal judge ruled that DACA must end, causing more anxiety and stress for these families. Congress should fix this. Give a pathway to legalization and citizenship for Dreamers, for TPS recipients, and for the farm workers and other essential workers that make our country work. This is personal for me. 100 years ago, August 22nd of 1921, my father was born in a small medieval village on the mountaintops of southern Italy. He immigrated to the United States as a young boy. He was the first kid from the neighborhood to go to college. He fought in World War II as a navigator on a B-24 and got the Distinguished Flying Cross. He came home and went to Harvard Law School on the GI Bill. My father would always say, "What a country." He went on to live a great American success story. So like I said, this is personal for me. 27 years ago, I served as the young mayor of my hometown, the city of Glen Cove, New York. I addressed the growing issue of new immigrants from Central and South America who were gathering on street corners looking for work by creating the first day worker site anywhere on the East Coast of the United States of America in 1994. I relied on the fundamental American principle: all men and women are created equal. It's not that all men and women with a passport are created equal, or all men and women with a green card are created equal. Every human being should be treated with human respect and dignity. And we've failed to address this problem for 30 years. Those same men who gathered on the street corners 27 years ago now have their own businesses. They own their own homes, and their children went to school with my children. One dreamer graduated high school with my daughter, went on to graduate from college with a degree in biomedical engineering, got a master's degree in biomedical engineering, is now pursuing a doctorate in the same subject. But now he's suffering every day, worried about his immigration status, worried about how this court ruling will affect him and his family. Dreamers have been shaken yet again. Let's fix this. Let's do it. Dreamers are ready to live the same American success story that my father lived. Let's give dreamers, TPS recipients, farm workers, and other essential workers a path to citizenship, and let's do it now. And I yield back.
예, 안녕하십니까 여러분. 저희 일부 순서에서는 저희 스테이트 주 로메이커 분들을 모시고 논의하는 시간을 가졌습니다. 이제는 2부에서는 우리 연방 위원이신 톰 수아지 위원님을 모시고 우리 한인 커뮤니티의 중요한 안건을 논의하는 시간을 갖겠습니다. Congressman Suozzi, welcome to this discussion of important issues facing the Korean American community. During part one of the proceedings today, we had state lawmakers, and there were 5. So each person was allotted 2 minutes to answer the questions. Today, we're privileged to have you by yourself. So we have plenty of time to get your thoughts on the issues that are most pressing on our minds, that we're really privileged to have you here with us. So with that, perhaps would you like to say a few words?
I just want to say 감사합니다 and 안녕하세요. And I just want to, I see Linda Lee is in the background, and I want to just say 축하합니다. Congratulations on your victory. Good job. And would you like me to say something first, or you want to just ask me the questions? How do you want to do it?
Well, since we do have an hour, I think we can, so if you'd like to say a few words of
I'll just say that I'm very
great.
happy to be here, so thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I'm very grateful. My wife, Helene, came with me this evening. Helene, stand up in the back so everybody can say hello to you. That's my wife, Helene Suozzi. We have to go to another event right after this. We're going to have to go to Manhattan. And the Korean American community is very important to me. It's a very important part of my district. You're my people, and I'll do everything I can to try and be helpful to you. And I have a lot of friends in the Korean American community. I've learned a lot over the years about your community. I have a lot of, like I said, good friends. I've been a lot of good parties. I went to South Korea a couple of years ago. I forget how many years ago was that, honey? Maybe 3 years ago I went to South Korea. 3, 4? And I know that we're going to talk about a lot of very important issues tonight. And one of the things that I've found is that the Korean American community is much more educated as a group than the United States as a whole. It's more upwardly mobile, very successful, and as I said in my remarks before, my father was born in Italy, so I'm a first-generation American. And I know that many new immigrants, as I think of my grandparents, are mainly focused on, just surviving, just getting by, and coming to a new community and putting down roots. But then you see your children and your grandchildren get more involved in community life. So I'm excited to see that so many people would show up on a Friday night to come listen to their congressman talk about the issues that are important to you. And I know we're going to talk about not only things here in the United States, but also on the Korean Peninsula as well. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that, officially, according to the legal documents, there's still a war going on. And, we should fix that. And that the Korean War should be over and ended. And we should be doing everything we can to try and help those families, especially that are so old now, those people that are getting so old that have relatives in North Korea that they've never been able to see them. And we should be doing whatever we can to reunify those families every chance we get. And I think that the president of the Republic of Korea, South Korea, has been very effective in communicating how much he wants to see peace. And we have to figure out how we can accomplish that peace. Not letting North Korea take advantage of us, not letting them manipulate people, but really in an earnest and honest way trying to facilitate that peace. South Korea is one of the greatest examples in the world, no exaggeration, one of the greatest examples of the world, who in a very short period of time has gone from a country that was ravaged by war to a country that adopted democracy, that a country that received aid from other countries in the world, and now are a booming economic success and are giving aid to other countries. So it's one of the best examples in the world of a country that made the turnaround, utilizing democracy and capitalism to uplift the quality of life for the people who live there. So the last thing I'll say is that the first piece of legislation that was adopted by the United States Congress after Joe Biden was elected, before he even became president, but the first piece of legislation of all, there's hundreds of pieces of legislation. The first piece of legislation that was adopted after Joe Biden was elected in November of 2020 was a resolution that I sponsored to reaffirm the importance of the relationship between the United States of America and South Korea. So I'm going to continue to promote that. And I've been very involved with getting vaccines over there. I wrote letters to the president. I got other people to write letters about that. So there's more we need to do. But with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Congressman. In fact, I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative, if it's okay, and change around the order of the questions. Congressman, you were on the House Foreign Relations Committee, so you are very familiar with the issues surrounding the conflict with North Korea and the peace process. So actually, I'm going to ask the organization which prepared a question regarding the peace process. I'm going to ask President Yang Ho of Pyeongtaek to come up and pose a question regarding the peace process.
My name is Ho Yang. I'm the chairperson of National Unification Advisory Committee, New York chapter. I have two simple questions to Congressman. Do you think there is any possibility that H.R. 3446 to end the Korean War will be passed in this fiscal year?
I think that it's possible, and it's very difficult. There are only 12 co-sponsors right now. I'm one of them. And this is a bill to say we officially end the Korean War. And the chairman of the committee is a guy named Brad Sherman. He's the chairman of the subcommittee on which involves the Korean Peninsula. We need to really work on Greg Meeks, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee as a whole, who represents Queens, to try and help us with that. He could be very effective. I don't know of any reasons why we shouldn't do this. I don't know if there of any implications that would be bad for us. I think that it would be a very good sign of good faith, without giving anything too much to North Korea, by saying that there's no longer a war going on, because for all practical reality it's not. Now the fact there may be some implications regarding the bases and the amount of troops that are there and other things, but I think that can be worked out. So I will continue to sponsor this legislation. I'm not on Foreign Affairs now, I'm on Ways and Means now, but I was on Foreign Affairs. And it's just a matter of keeping this on the front of the minds of the people involved, like Greg Meeks and Brad Sherman and other members of the committee. It's possible, it's difficult, but it's very doable.
Anyway, Korean community really appreciate your support to HR 3446. The other thing is that for the declaration of the end of Korean War or the peace agreement between the United States and North Korea, there are so many political issues involved. So it seems not to be easy to be passed those kind of bills. However, ensure the humanitarian aid, such as a lot of medicines or the formula like the dry milk, to the North Korean children. Can you have any idea of a plan to propose a bill to ease just a little and partially the United government's sanction against North Korea?
It's a very difficult issue because, as we all know, North Korea has not been a very good partner in this effort. And none of us want to see the North Korean people suffer. They're still human beings. We don't want to see the people or the children suffer. And it's so complicated because it's not as simple as, what's the relationship between America and North Korea? What's the relationship between North Korea and South Korea? What's the biggest factor in this relationship? Somebody tell me. What's the biggest factor that overrides this relationship? Anybody want to guess? Well, that's the nuclear weapons, very big factor. What else is a very big factor in addition to nuclear weapons? China. That's the big factor in this, okay? China is immediately next to North Korea. China likes the idea of having a buffer between China and South Korea. China wants to have the control, the influence. They want to be the ones that provide the most money, the most arms, the most support for North Korea. And they don't, you know, what's right, what's wrong is not the concern. This is about their strategic interests. The biggest thing that Kim Jong-un and the Chinese Communist Party are most concerned about is the reunification of the peninsula, because they're afraid of having a democratic capitalist state that is aligned with the United States of America right on their border. They're afraid of that. And so everything that we do to try and facilitate peace is always affected by what the Chinese Communist Party wants to see happen. So the president of South Korea, as I said, has been very effective in communicating how much he really genuinely wants peace. I mean, I think he's been remarkable. I think it's been very courageous the way that he has conducted himself, not with any no phoniness. Very straightforward. He wants peace, but we need to persuade America. We really need the president of South Korea to persuade America that they should be providing aid. You know, the philosophy of the Trump administration, not just here in North Korea, but in other places that we had problems with in the world, was let's do everything we can to hurt them so that will bring them to the table. That hasn't proven to be very effective. It's just a lot of misery and a lot of suffering. Now, most of that misery and suffering, I would argue, is because of the policies of the North Korean government, not because America is not providing them aid. But we should be doing what we can to help children, as you said, provide dry milk for children. So I'll discuss this with Greg Meeks to try and get his viewpoints on this as well, because he knows this much better than I do.
Thanks a lot.
I'd like to move from foreign policy to what's going on here domestically. I noticed I was going over your bio that not only were you formerly on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but you are currently on the Asian Pacific American Caucus.
Yes.
So we have, next question we have is from the Korean American Sanctuary Church Network. I'd like to invite Reverend Won-tae Cho to come up, and he'd like to pose a question regarding what we've been experiencing since a heightened experience with Asian hate since the pandemic started.
Our organization started in March 2017 to protect the immigrant communities and to resist the Trump administration anti-immigrant policies. Currently, we have 150 membership churches with over 30,000 congregation members. I'm today so lucky to ask you a question today. I know you are deeply interested in peace on Korean Peninsula issue, and you are very close to President Biden. So frankly speaking, I would like to ask about peace issue on the Korean Peninsula, but the question gave to me is about the issue of anti-American hate crime issue. So I would like to ask two related questions.
If you could limit yourself to Asian hate crime, because we already covered the peace issue. So if you could just address the Asian hate issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I would like to ask two related questions regarding the urgent issue of anti-Asian hate crime. What can we do to receive widespread support and recognition of this bill? Is there a way to include long-term hate crime prevention efforts in the bill to ensure that we can prevent hate crimes from occurring in the first place? That is my question.
So, anti-Asian hate is a very real problem. And, I think it's very much the result. There's two factors. Number one is there's tremendous discrimination in America throughout history. Throughout the world, there's discrimination. But in America, we've always had discrimination. My father had tremendous discrimination as an Italian American in the 1930s and 40s and 50s because Mussolini had went with Hitler during World War II, so the Italians, everybody was afraid of the Italians. They thought they were either fascists or they were in the mafia. And he had a fight against discrimination his whole life. He went to Harvard Law School, but he couldn't get a job at a big law firm in New York City. And then we've seen other groups. Now we see the Latinos and the Muslims have been discriminated against a lot. And now the Asians really have gone through a tremendous increase in Asian hate crimes over the past 8 months or so. Now, I believe this is directly related to President Trump's comments when he talked about the Asian flu. Look out for kung flu and things like, and all Asian people, not just Koreans, but Chinese as well, and other people that look the same, people were being beaten up on the subways, people were being knocked down on the streets, people were saying nasty things to each other. And there's been tremendous rally from the entire community, I think, to stand up against this. You've seen elected officials do a lot about this. Grace Meng sponsored legislation. Everybody supported it. I supported it. And will continue to support legislation to get the law enforcement officials at the federal level to work more closely with the local officials to try and target people who commit these crimes. But really the answer, which is in your question, is about education. We need to educate our young people about the Asian American history in the United States of America, the discrimination they've faced. There's been a lot of people, Asian Americans have been in America for a long time, Chinese especially. But we need to educate people more, and we need to get back to the basic fundamental ideas of this country. This has been, we take it for granted about this wonderful country, but it's really a new idea. If you listen to my remarks that were on the video before, my father was born 100 years ago. In August of this year, my father would have been 100 years old. He died when he was 95, 2 weeks before my election in 2016. We're only 100 years since he was born. America's not much more than 240 years old. So we're a relatively new place. And the idea that all men and women are created equal is a new idea in human history. And we are the great experiment here in the United States of America to make that a reality. You have democracy and you have capitalism in South Korea, but it's a very homogeneous community. Everybody's very much the same. In the United States, you've got all different types of people. And everybody throughout our history has been discriminated against. The first people here were the Dutch. The Dutch discriminated against the English. Then the Dutch and the English discriminated against the Germans. And the Dutch and the English and the Germans discriminated against the Irish. And then they all discriminated against the Italians and the Jews. And now we see the Muslims and the Latinos, and now the Asian Americans. So everybody's been through this in our history. And look at the way African Americans, the blacks, have been treated. They've been treated awful. So we have to constantly work at living up to the idea that all men and women are created equal. Education is one of the most important things. We need to fund education programs so that students will learn about this concept generally and also specifically related to Asian Americans. So I'm in favor of that, and I sponsor every piece of legislation that's put forward for that type of thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Because we do have a limited amount of time, and we do have a number of organizations which have posed questions, perhaps at the end, if the congressman could stay and you have additional questions, you could pose the questions after the formal.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
Segment is over. Congressman, you mentioned the introductory video that we all watched, and we were very heartened by your statements regarding DACA. One of the hot issues right now, frankly, has to do with, do you utilize this moment, this opportunity with the budget reconciliation process to afford some sort of forward path with respect to those who are not documented? So this question is going to be posed by Angelina of Min권센터. I'd like to invite Angelina up to pose the question.
Hi, my name is Angel Rena. I'm from the Min권cen터 for Community Action, and my question is about immigration. So there are more than 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States today without a pathway to citizenship. In addition, 1 in 5 Korean Americans here in New York City are undocumented. We need a pathway to citizenship for all 11 million undocumented immigrants, and we have a unique opportunity now to pass immigration legislation with a simple 51-50 Senate majority through the budget reconciliation process. And so with that, I have a couple of important questions for you. Do you support immigration reform through budget reconciliation? And will you commit to speaking with congressional leadership and the Democratic caucus first to prioritize citizenship for essential workers and their family members in budget reconciliation, and second, to remove any funds to the Homeland Security Department for border funding?
So I anticipated that question, and that's why I asked that video to be shown tonight. So I've spoken out very publicly that I'm very much in favor of a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, for TPS recipients, and for essential workers, including farm workers. And I've been advocating for this for a long, long time. There's one thing I'm going to disagree with you in what your comments were. You said there's a simple process. It's not a simple process. It's very difficult because there are so many different priorities as to what people want to accomplish right now. And holding together the 51 votes in the Senate, and even getting the majority in the House of Representatives, where you need 218 votes. We can only afford to lose 3 votes from the Democrats. And if we lose those 3 votes, 4 votes, we lose the issue.
Could you, for those of us in the audience who are not familiar with the process, could you just unpack that a little bit? Because you can have an immigration reform bill, for example, that's been put forth, by several lawmakers, but you have a process right now called budget reconciliation.
Yeah.
If you could unpack that a little bit.
So there's legislation for a pathway to citizenship for all 11 million that the president has proposed, that there is legislation in the Congress that I have co-sponsored. There's other legislation for a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and a pathway to citizenship for TPS. There's other legislation that talks about not citizenship, but a pathway to legalization. Not citizenship, which means you can't vote, but you don't have to worry about getting kicked out of the country. For farm workers and essential. So there's all different types of legislation. To pass normal legislation, you need to get the majority of the House of Representatives, which means you need 218 votes. So that's pretty straightforward. You need 218 votes in the House. It's 435 seats, 218 is the majority. We only have a 3-vote majority. In the Senate, you have to get, even though there's 100 senators and you get a tiebreaker with the vice president, you can't just get 50-50 for most votes. You have to get 51-50 for most votes. You have to get 60 votes to pass something in the Senate to overcome the filibuster rule. There is, however, a unique procedure that is used for budgeting that can be done, they say, once, maybe twice a year, and there's some debate about that, for a thing called reconciliation. Under reconciliation, which is, it's a budget reconciliation, and there's an argument that you could only use it for financial terms. So there's a debate about whether this can be used in reconciliation, but we argue that you can use it for you can do it. In this unique process, you can get something passed once or twice a year related to budgets by the 51-50 vote. That's what many people are advocating to do now, to try and pass it with 218 in the House and 51-50 in the Senate. Even though some people are saying you can't do that because it's not really a budget item. Some people are saying you can't do it as many times as we're doing it, but I would say we can. The challenge is...
Just on that point, I suppose you could argue that if you were to pursue this process, that it would result in significant increase in revenue. Is that how a budget item may be impacted?
Yes, because there are fees that are related to a lot of this stuff as well. And it would also affect Social Security payments, and people will be able to pay taxes who aren't necessarily paying taxes now. The challenge is that a lot of people have different priorities. Some people, this is their number one priority, is a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, for TPS, for essential workers. For me, my number one priority is the restoration of the state and local tax deduction. Because that's what happened was in 2017, President Trump and the Republican majority capped the deduction of the state and local tax deduction at $10,000. For those of you that pay high property taxes and high income taxes on top of that, which are very high in New York State compared to other places, you know a lot of people are leaving New York State because of those taxes, especially wealthier people. And it's not because I want to do a favor for wealthy people. In fact, let's increase the top rate on wealthy people, but for everybody in the country. What my concern is that there's a report that exists, and I think it's low, is that 5% of the people that make $10 million a year or more have left New York to go to Florida. Why? Because they have very low taxes in Florida. Why do they have low taxes in Florida? Because they don't insure their children. They never did the Affordable Care Act. They don't have mass transit. They don't have unions. They don't pay their teachers as much. They don't pay their civil servants as much. There's a whole bunch of reasons. They don't have sewers. They have a big problem with red tide now. They don't believe in climate change, so they don't do things to address climate change. So the taxes are lower down there. So that's my number one priority. So yes, I will support a path to citizenship for all 11 million people. I don't think, though, we can get 218. I'll vote for it if it comes up. But I don't think we can get 218 votes in the House, and I don't think we can get 51 votes in the Senate. I do think we can get those votes for a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and TPS. That I think we can get done, and possibly essential workers, not the whole 11 million. But if it comes up, I'll vote for it. And even if I do vote for it and we do pass it in the House, we then have to pass it in the Senate. And I don't think we can get 50 votes in the Senate. It would even be difficult to get a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers and TPS in the Senate. So that's part of the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I'd like to move on to another topic. With the pandemic, you've been on the forefront in providing relief to millions and millions of Americans. One issue that we have as an immigrant community is language access.
Always a pleasure to have you here with us. Good evening. I'm Youngsu Choi. I'm the chairperson to Legal Task Force for Protection of Immigrants under Korean American Civic Empowerment. I've seen Congressman Suozzi getting job done by being more fiery, angrier, and standing tall on tough issues affecting Korean community and community in general, especially tax issues. For that, we are all thankful. My question is about providing information in multiple languages at the federal level. A lot of sources being distributed to the community regarding public assistance SVA programs and all. But we have a difficulty in getting that information process back to the community. Korean American Civic Empowerment, KCS, Min권센터, and other Korean community organizations, we're trying to translate that English information to the community. We still have a problem in that issue. So as a congressman in federal level, how would you address this issue? What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. 감사합니다. I'm very much in favor of providing the information in different languages. It's very difficult. Why is it difficult? You know, here in New York, if you've ever looked at the ballots or you look at different information provided by the city of New York or even the state of New York, it's in multiple languages. Why? Because New York is so diverse. You know, you mentioned before I'm part of the Asian caucus, right? 18% of my district is Asian and South Asian. Chinese, Korean, Indian, and Pakistani. I have one of the largest percentages in the country, though. There are many places in America, they don't know any Koreans. They don't know any Indians. They don't know any Chinese. They don't know any Pakistanis. They don't know people from different, they don't even know Latinos. They don't even have African Americans in their community. They don't have any Jewish people. So we take our diversity for granted here in New York State. To us, it's so obvious that we would provide information in multiple languages. But similar to the previous question, when you have to get 218 votes in the House and you have to get 60 votes in the Senate, or even the 50 votes, if it reconciles, it's very hard. I remember in politics back in the 1990s, maybe 2000, there was an effort to try and get things in Spanish. And you wouldn't believe the anger that came from different parts of the country. Speak American, speak English. And we take for granted the things we have in New York. New York is such a unique place in the country and in the world. And I believe it's a remarkable place, a remarkable manifestation of the American dream and the American principles. But it's very difficult to do in the rest of the country. So there's legislation now that Grace Meng has supported for us to do. I'm on that legislation. I support the legislation. But getting it done, I don't want to give anybody any false hopes. Because if you're somebody from Oklahoma, or you're someone from Iowa or North Dakota, this is the furthest thing from your mind. You don't care about that. So it's hard to get the votes you need. As time goes on, things will change. It will get better. But it's not going to happen tomorrow. I'm reasonably sure of that. So we have to rely on the good people of New York State and New York City to help us with these things.
Thank you. You mentioned, Congressman, that your district is about 18% Asian.
Asian and South Asian.
Asian, South Asian. So I think this leads to the next question that is also going to be posed by KACE. It's by the staff attorney, 박재진 변호사님. And he has a question about redistricting.
Thank you, Congressman, for coming. And my question is about redistricting after Census 2020. As you know, on April 26, 2021, this year, and the Census Bureau delivered that apportionment. The result was 26 House of Representatives seats are apportioned to New York State. That means we are losing one seat. In 2010, we lost 2 seats, and as of the result of census, we are doing redistricting right now. We understand that you don't have any voice, authority to draw the map because you are a Congress member, and you will follow all the maps drawn by independent redistricting committee of New York State. But we just wanted to hear about your voice, your thoughts about your district. Since the last 10 years, there were changes in our community, and the new district map should cover that changes in your district. So, do you think your district will or shall be stay as it is. Now your district is covering northern part of 3 different counties: Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk. So we just wanted to hear your, can you share your thoughts about your district?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a very sophisticated question, so thank you for giving it. How many of you actually live in Queens? Raise your hand if you live in Queens. How many of you live in Nassau? Oh. How many of you live in Suffolk? Nobody from Suffolk, okay. So, I love my district. My district is great. I'm very lucky. And I would say my district is about 50%, white, Irish, Italian, other little groups of European, Catholic population. I would say about 50-55% Christian Catholic. Then I would say we have the 4th largest Jewish population in the United States of America in my district. That's hard to confirm, but I've heard that from my predecessor, Steve Israel. And if you look at the census numbers for people with Eastern European backgrounds, and just if you know the district, you see it. Then I have 18% of, as I said before, Chinese, Korean, Pakistani, and Indian. And it's changed a lot over the years. People who live, Great Neck is completely different than it used to be. It used to be all Reformed Jewish population. It's one of the most democratic areas in all of Nassau County. Now it's got a lot of Persian Jews and a lot of Koreans and Chinese in it. Where the good school districts are in Syosset and Jericho, a lot of Koreans and Chinese and Indians have moved into that area. A lot of Indians have moved into Herrick's area, for example. A lot more Latinos in my hometown of Glen Cove and in Huntington Station. And there are other places as well. But they've changed over the years. And it's the same, it's the same as it's always been, which people who have been upwardly mobile, who have made more money over time from their business or their jobs, have moved out into where they thought it was safer and where the school districts were better. To northeastern Queens, to Nassau, and to Suffolk. That's the changes that have happened throughout history, the history of this area. How my district will change, I don't have a good answer for you. It will get bigger. Most districts in the United States this is very important first. Let me say this one thing first. New York is losing influence in Washington, D.C. When I was born in 1962, New York had 45 members of Congress of the 435. We were the top dog, 45 of the 435. And because of the growth of population in other parts of the country, mainly because of air conditioning and irrigation, you've seen tremendous growth in the Southwest and the Southeast, where the land was cheaper. You could build brand new properties, double height ceilings, fancy places. That was cheaper. The land was cheaper, but now you had to pump in the water and you had to pump in the air conditioning, which has been bad for the climate on top of that. But we've slowly gotten smaller and smaller representation. As a matter of fact, California lost a seat for the first time this year. Where are they growing? They're growing in Texas. They're growing in Florida. Growing in North Carolina, South Carolina. Why? Because it's cheaper there. It's cheaper for the same reasons I talked about earlier. They don't insure their children. They don't insure their adults. They have a lot higher uninsured population. They don't have mass transit. They don't follow climate change. They don't have unions. They don't pay their teachers as much. They don't value education as much. Okay. So the districts are all going from about 750,000 people, because it's still 435 seats, but now there's a bigger population in the United States of America, to about 790,000 seats. So my district will change in its shape. There's places out in Suffolk County that I'd like to get rid of. But who knows what will happen. There's places in Nassau I'd like to grow. There's places in Queens I'd like to grow. But it's not just about me. Who's next to me? Grace Meng is next to me. Well, she doesn't want to lose the parts that she thinks are most important for her. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is near me. She's not going to want to lose the parts that are important to her. South of me is Greg Meeks and Kathleen Rice. they don't want to lose their places that they like. Now, in Suffolk County, there's Lee Zeldin and Andrew Garbarino. Andrew Garbarino took Peter King's seat. Those are 2 Republican seats. There may be an effort to try and change that. So there are members of Congress that are leaving. Upstate New York, there's a guy named Tom Reed. He's leaving. So that may be the 1 seat we lose. Lee Zeldin says he wants to run for governor. So they may try and do something with his seat. But it's, as you said, it's an independent commission. I can't talk about the political impacts. I can only talk about the community, how it will affect the community. Right now, my district makes a lot of sense. My district is actually very normal looking because it's kind of like a rectangle along the North Shore of northeastern Queens, Suffolk, and Nassau. So other places in the country, they go the crazy line. They call it gerrymandering. They gerrymander the district to pack all the Democrats in over here, pack all the Republicans over there. So it's very beautiful. So I can't give you a good prediction. But I doubt that they will put me further into Flushing, for example, because I don't think they would take that away from Grace Meng. But I could be wrong. I don't think that they'll put me further east into Suffolk. But they could put me further south in Suffolk, further south in Nassau, and possibly further south in Queens, but then that would affect Greg Meek's district, and he may not want to give that up. So, I don't know. I really don't know the answer. But it's going to change a little bit. Thank you. I really like my district. You know, most of the districts in America are safe seats. You can't lose because they draw the districts, they gerrymander them, where they're all Republican over here and all Democrat over there. So if you're the Republican in the Republican seat, you're going to win. If you're the Democrat in the Democratic seat, you're going to win. That's one of the big problems of our country, because the only way you can lose those seats is by losing a primary. Very few people vote in the primaries. The people that vote in the Republican primaries are often very far to the right. The people that vote in the Democratic primary are often very far to the left. So the people in the safe seats pander. They just try to give attention to the extremes on the far right or the far left. My district is what's called a D+1 district. It's very safe. It's very split. It's a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third independent. And it's only got a tiny little advantage for the Democratic candidate, just a little bit. It forces me to talk to everybody. I don't go to the far left, I don't go to the far right. I try to talk to everybody and try and understand what the people want. That's why I'm the vice chairman of a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. 28 Democrats and 28 Republicans. We meet every week to try and find common ground. You hear about a bipartisan infrastructure bill right now. We help negotiate that. So I like my district. I'm well suited for it. I like the diversity of my district. I learned a lot about the world from my district. And I like the fact that it's kind of like a middle of the road place. Not too extreme, not crazy pro-Trump, not crazy to the left. So they want people to work together.
In fact, just going back to your bio, you are the vice chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. So you are somebody who works across the aisle and tries to solve problems.
I mean, I'm a Democrat, but I try to work with people across the aisle, yes.
Yes. So this last question does not have a organization that is tied to it, but it's a very important question for the Korean American community. You are here at KCS. KCS Community Center, among other things, looks after the well-being of our elderly. And you, as I understand it, you've introduced legislation called Well-Being Insurance for Seniors to be at home, is to provide long-term care insurance benefits to middle-income seniors. Could you briefly explain why you introduced this bill and what this bill is trying to accomplish, and what do you need to get it passed?
So this is called the WISH Act, and it's to help senior citizens to age and likely die at home. And this is very personal for me. I grew up in a house, all 4 of my grandparents lived in my house growing up. 3 were very sick. And my mother was a former nurse, and she did most of the caregiving, but even I took care of my grandparents when I was a teenager. And my parents didn't want to be a burden on their children, so they got long-term health care insurance. And so my father, who died when he was 95 in 2016, 2 weeks before my election, and my mother, who died a year later, she was 93, they both died at home, and they had long-term care insurance. And of course we lived in the same hometown. I'd be over there all the time. I paid my parents' bills and things like that. But they had people who would come to the house and take care of them. And they really lived a very dignified old age, and they died very comfortably at home. And so that's getting almost impossible for most senior citizens, because long-term health care insurance is too expensive now. Because what happened is when they first issued long-term care insurance policies, they didn't factor into the fact that a lot of people live much longer than the 1 or 2 years that they expect you to need long-term care. Some people live 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, and so the insurance companies lost a lot of money. Now they increased the premiums to get that insurance very, very high. Add to that, there are 10,000 new senior citizens in America every day, because the baby boomers are all becoming senior citizens now. Add to that, that in the 1900s, the early 1900s, for every elderly person over 65, you had 20 people that could take care of them, because they had more children, they had more relatives in the area, and people didn't move away. Now what happens with children? People have less children, and the children move to all parts of the country. So when senior citizens get old, who's there to take care of them? There's less people available to take care of them. So it's expensive, there's a lot of them, and there's nobody to take care of them in their families the way they historically were. It's a beautiful, nice thing about Korean American culture is you take care of your elderly people. We do that in my family too. So I have proposed a bill that says we need to create a fund in the federal government that will pay for catastrophic care, which means if you need long-term care more than 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, this fund will pay for that part of it. And then the insurance companies will only be responsible for 1 or 2 years, or you do it yourself. And that will make the insurance much less expensive, so people can afford to buy that insurance. And so, but to do it, we'd have to charge a 0.3% payroll tax. But that's very little money, but it would change the quality of life for millions of senior citizens in America. So it's not going to happen this year. I just proposed it this year. The president is working on doing things for senior citizens as well, but we have to get this conversation going in the country. We cannot afford to take all of our senior citizens and put them in nursing homes. Not only do we not have enough nursing homes, but the quality of care in our nursing homes is not always as good as we'd like it to be, and most people don't want to go to nursing homes. They would much rather age at home. So we need to set up a system whereby community supports like you have here with lunch programs and recreation and entertainment, and then people with caregivers to help them stay at home, to help them when they need help with, like, you know, getting into bed or getting their food or going to the bathroom or taking a shower, things that gets harder and harder to do as you become a senior citizen. So I feel this very strongly because I've seen it personally, not only in my own family, but throughout my career as mayor and as county executive, and I just want to try and solve this problem through a public-private partnership. And I'm willing to listen to other ideas, but I think my idea is a pretty good one. So I'm going to keep on pushing for that to try and help our senior citizens in our country. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you.
감사합니다, everybody.
So,
감사합니다.